Usually, I think almost always, when I start a research project, I have an idea of what the findings will be. I'm rarely surprised, but today, this project did surprise me. I thought that I knew why some people were able to score normally with hearing aids on a very difficult test. In fact, so difficult that even normal hearing people can't get 100%. That's the kind of test you want because it has what's called no ceiling effect. There's no one who does so well that they top out too early in the game. And this test really is a good representation of what happens to you in the real world. So when I discovered that Ashley and I were seeing more people in the clinic who were scoring normally, I wanted to know what was the variable. Why is this? What's unique about these people? I kind of thought I knew based on some things that Nikki had said to me and some others, but I was surprised by the results. So the first question we need to look at is it even possible to hear normally with hearing aids? You wouldn't think so, because people always say to you, well, it's not normal hearing. But come to find out, you might be able to score normally on a very hard-to-speech understanding in-noise test. In fact, back in 2004, one of my co-authors on a recent paper, Ruth Bentler and Catherine Palmer at University of Pittsburgh Medical School, and Dittenberner, who was at University of Iowa with Dr. Bentler, reported they had found a hearing aid that allowed people to score normally on a test known as the hearing in noise test, or the HINT for short, the hearing in noise test. But as time passed by, others started looking at this hearing in noise test. Oh, and I should say, I should notice in this study, they used only one hearing aid. It was something called a Siemens Triano, a hearing aid with 3 microphones. It was very innovative. Most hearing aids have 2 microphones, one facing forward and one facing backward, but the Triano had 3, hence the name Triano. And they said, okay, with this hearing aid, these people are able to score normally on this hearing in noise test, which is a fairly old test and not used much anymore, but at the time it was all the rage. So I questioned it, and I think it really strained my relationship with my co-author, because I called her and said, this can't be. So time went by and this study was long forgotten. 2004 was a long time ago. But some work was done on the next slide. Looking at their subjects, they had a fairly large amount of hearing loss, certainly more than some of the previous hearing tests we had talked about from Johns Hopkins or Indiana University, some research we had discussed in past months. These people had pretty good sized hearing losses, average age of 62 years, ranging from 27 to 85. And to help you read this hearing test, you have to understand that if you had perfect 20/20 hearing, there'd be a straight line across at 0 at every different pitch. You see up there at the top those numbers 250, 500, 1000. Well, those are different pitches, 250 being a very low pitch sound like the vowel ah, and 6,000, 8,000 being a very high pitch sound like the consonant S. So in this hearing test form, you see represented all the different speech sounds in the English language. And you can see these people, on average, had progressively greater hearing loss in the higher pitches. They were equal between the 2 ears. If you could see this really close up, there are zeros and X's, not just dots, but they had exactly symmetrical hearing losses, and they had pretty substantial hearing losses. In fact, Ashley calculated for me, I believe on the next page, Yep, they only could hear 30% of speech sounds without hearing aids. So these are people that had more hearing loss than most of you would have when you start wearing hearing aids, because if you're missing 70% of what people are saying, you're not going to be very functional in society or in your family. They're going to get kind of unhappy with you listening to television when sitting side by side with you, because that's a lot of hearing loss. So here are these people, lots of hearing loss, scoring normally on this hearing and noise test. Hooray. But the test, that hearing and noise test, has been looked at over the last 14 years with two groups, the group at Memphis State University and the group at the Veterans Administration in Tennessee. And I didn't put both studies up, but they came to the same conclusion, which is shown on the next slide. Basically, they said that this hearing and noise test is too easy. It does have a ceiling. It would be like me saying we're going to administer a physical fitness test to everyone in this room. And those who are normal physical fitness level can do one push-up. Well, you might say, but you know, that's not really physical fitness. Most people can do one. I'm assuming you can do one push-up.
I can do 5.
Oh, see? Well, there you go. But if that were the criteria, just one push-up, it would be a little too easy. It would make everybody look like they were physically fit. Well, the hint test is much like that. The hint test has a ceiling rather quickly for people. So we started looking with some suspicion at this hearing and noise test. But both this article by Wilson and McCardle, as well as the article I didn't show by Cox and her colleagues at Memphis University, concluded the same exact thing. The word and noise test and the quick speech and noise test are the two better tests of people's ability to function in the real world. Okay, great. I didn't particularly like the word in noise test because it's not very real world. And by that I mean you only have to repeat one word of each sentence. And in real life, you really need to hear all the sentence. So I didn't think that, even though the tests are equivalent, I don't think it has as much what's called face validity. It doesn't make as much sense as using a sentence test, because in real life you have to hear sentences and you have to respond appropriately to them, which is where the quick speech and noise test or the quick SIN test comes in. So let's talk just a minute about this hint test. It's too easy to really separate those with hearing aids from those with normal hearing, because a whole lot of people score normally on the hint test. It's too easy. But these two tests are better, word and noise and quick speech and noise, or quick SIN. So let's talk about the quick SIN, because that's the one that has gotten the most attention and is most often used clinically, as shown by a study by Douglas Beck a couple of years back. So this is the one, the quick speech and noise test. And here's how it goes. The sound's in the back of the room, but I'm hoping you'll be able to hear a few parts of the sentence. Go ahead, Nikki.
Okay.
Pitch the straw through the door of the stable.
Pitch the straw through the door of the stable. Now the next one gets harder, more people talking.
The sink is the thing in which we pile dishes.
The sink is the thing in which we pile dishes. More noise on the third sentence.
Post no bills on this office wall.
Post no bills on this office wall.
Dimes showered down from all sides.
Dimes showered down from all sides. Pick a card and slip it under the pack. See what I mean? Even normal hearing people do not have a ceiling on this test, but there is a normal score. I got it. I got the first 25 keywords correct in all 5 sentences. I think it said something about sales.
I heard sales.
But so I actually got one more, but I've never seen anybody get that last sentence 100% correct, even with normal hearing, even when you're 20 whatever she is. So my point is, this is a hard test. And we got people that scored normally on it, scored the same as I did. It's really mind-boggling. So, does it relate to the real world? Oh, yes. Again, the group at Walter Reed, back when there was a Walter Reed, had an excellent audiology group, and they looked to see what test really corresponded most to real-world listening. And in other words, when people did well on this test, did they come back and say, well, yeah, in the real world, I'm doing okay? Sure enough, this is the one. The quick speech and noise test does relate to real-world listening more than any other test we have in our profession. So, it's the best predictor of hearing aid success in the real world. Now, besides just real-world prediction, there's actually some physiological benefits to having a good score on this quick speech and noise test. Let's take a look at what that means. This woman here, Anu Sharma from University of Colorado at Boulder, is the department head and an audiologist who looked at brain recordings of people who had early onset mild hearing losses. And here's what she found. They made brain recordings of adults with normal hearing and early onset mild hearing loss. They noted that the brains of adults with mild early onset hearing loss worked differently than people who didn't have hearing loss. Their brains were doing something different on these brain recordings. Let's start with the differences that occur when normal hearing and hard of hearing people do an auditory task like we just did. That quick speech and noise test is a perfect example. In fact, this is the one she used. We would expect that when you're doing an auditory task like listening to speech in a noisy place, you would be using the auditory area of the brain. That stands to reason, and you can see it circled in red there, the temporal lobe. This is where speech understanding is. So that's what happens. There's the functional MRI of a normal hearing individual performing on the quick speech and noise test. Son of a gun, the auditory area of the brain lights up like it should. But that's not what happens with people who have had just 3 months of hearing loss, 3 months of mild untreated hearing loss. Already their brain had shifted the way it perceives speech. And what she discovered is it moves to the frontal and prefrontal areas of the brain. That's odd. People with hearing loss are using the frontal and prefrontal area of the brain for listening, and it only took 3 months for this change to occur. So, what's the appropriate purpose of this frontal and prefrontal area, you might ask? Well, that's where the plot gets interesting. That's where your memory is. That's where your reasoning ability is. So you're using, as it says on the next slide, those of you with improperly, next slide. So those people with untreated hearing loss, even of mild degree, after 3 months, are misusing the frontal area of the brain. Next slide. They're using the memory and reasoning area. And back in 2012, Dr. Lin from Johns Hopkins Medical University showed us that if you have a mild hearing loss, you're twice as likely to experience dementia. If you have a moderate hearing loss, you're 3 times as likely, and if you have a severe hearing loss, 5 times as likely. Well, isn't that interesting? Could it be that the hearing loss keeps the reasoning and memory areas of the brain too busy to perform their appropriate duties? And that could explain why hearing loss increases the risk of dementia. The more there is, the more risk, because you're having to use that frontal area more and more to figure out what was being said, even though you missed a few words along the way. Now, if you take a look at where dementia strikes, frontal area, what a coincidence. People with dementia have frontal area brain malfunction. So, Dr. Lynn's overworking hypothesis, which he guessed from the beginning, he said 3 possible things, but his favorite was that you're overworking your brain in the areas where you should be storing your memory and reasoning capabilities. They're doing auditory stuff instead. And the auditory area wasn't doing a darn thing. Begs the question, what would the auditory area be up to then? It's not just the auditory area and the reasoning areas of the brain being affected. It's also the visual area, that area in the back of the brain. When you're doing a visual test like, look at these pictures and show me what 2 of these pictures are similar, that's a visual task. It doesn't require any hearing, it's just a visual task. But come to find out, Dr. Sharma showed that when people with normal hearing do visual tasks, as you would expect, the visual area of the brain lights up. But, next slide, please. Yes.
Area in the front.
Yes.
Here.
Yep. And that's exactly what happens with normal hearing people. They're doing a visual task, back of the brain, the visual area, the occipital lobe, if you will, lights up. Makes perfectly good sense. But that's not what happens with normal hearing people, with hard of hearing people. They're using the auditory area to perform visual tasks, and I think I know why. I think that someone like Nikki and David use lip reading effectively. They are tying their visual area to their auditory area so they can lip read. And I think this is why this thing shifts forward to the auditory area. They're trying to access their auditory memory to do lip reading. And people like Nikki are shockingly good at it. But it's scrambling the areas of the brain to do it. So, we can conclude that this brain reorganization is taking place everywhere. It's not just in the auditory area. It's the frontal, it's the temporal, it's the occipital, and I didn't say it, but it's also the somatosensory up here at the top area. So, the whole brain is rearranging because of an untreated hearing loss. But there is some good news in this story. If you score normally on, guess what, the quick speech and noise test with your hearing aids, or cochlear implants, I might add, it appears to be brain sparing. Here is a person on the left who got a very good quick speech and noise score, a normal quick speech and noise score. Here's a person on the right who didn't, and there they are still using the auditory area. So it's not just enough to have a hearing aid. That's not the gig. It's a normal score on the quick speech and noise test is the criteria. And you can see how difficult it would be to score normally on the quick speech and noise test because we just did one. And I'm guessing that no one out there in this room scored normally. I don't see anybody raising their hand saying, oh wait, I got it. So the obvious question becomes, how do you score normally on this test? Well, we have some insight into that. Back in 2012, we won an award, and in 2013 for that matter, from our National Association for this study. What we did is we took a 20-year-old Siemens Infinity hearing aid, and it had virtually no features. It had a single microphone, so it didn't have any noise reduction capabilities. It had no noise processing. It wasn't even a digital hearing aid. It was analog, cast back into the past. And it had nothing but a volume control and programming capabilities. So what I did is I got 6 people together, 2 of whom are sitting in the back of the room here today, and had them, actually almost 3, one sister was here in that group too, and I had them listen to, you guessed it, the quick speech and noise test with a variety of hearing aids. The first one, though, was just this 20-year-old hearing aid, and I didn't tell them which was which. I didn't say, okay, now this is a 20-year-old and this is a brand new one. We just put them on them and started testing. And with the old hearing aid programmed exactly to their hearing loss, they scored 8.5. And now think of those as an error score. So they made a few errors. They made 8 errors, essentially. Not a bad score, but not good enough to really claim victory. But then I looked at how most people program hearing aids in this country. And most people who program hearing aids in this country use something called the manufacturer's first fit, or I call it best guess. Or perhaps I should call it bad guess, because studies have shown consistently over the years that they are a bad guess. They don't give you enough hearing. And across the board, they do not ever give you enough hearing. So everybody out there who has hearing aids fit by this method is wearing hearing aids that don't have enough volume, particularly in the high pitches, which are critical for speech understanding. So what I did was I took the big 6 manufacturers, that's Oticon, Phonak, Resound, Siemens, now known as Savantos, Starkey, and Widex, and I ordered their premium hearing aids, the very best they had in 2012. And I used their software to make the best guess for all these 6 subjects as to what they should be wearing for their hearing aid, how much volume. And the error rates were much larger than it was with a 20-year-old hearing aid that had no features whatsoever. In fact, the 20-year-old analog hearing aid with no noise reduction features beat every one of those 6 manufacturers' hearing aids when they were used as recommended by the manufacturer. So that doesn't speak very well for how well people are going to be doing with hearing aids, given that that is sort of the law of the land as to how people program hearing aids. But I reasoned that, things have improved some over the last 20 years. There must be some benefit. So let's go back in and reprogram these hearing aids to where these people can actually hear with them. And come to find out, the error rates dramatically dropped. You can see how much smaller they were. And all but one of them beat out the 20-year-old hearing aid. Well, good, you would hope so, that in 20 years we'd come somewhere in terms of hearing aid technology. So, but what's the punchline here? You have to give more volume than typical of most hearing aids programmed in this country for these scores to improve. And let me say one more thing about that slide. You would think, looking at the dramatic difference between hearing aid number 3, which was the worst of the error rates when the manufacturer's first fit was used, and the best when the hearing aid was properly programmed to each individual's hearing loss, you would think then the manufacturer would say, well then, you've got to use real ear measures, which we'll describe in a minute. Otherwise, you can't use our hearing aids because they're going to look like they're not as good as a 20-year-old hearing aid from Siemens that was really okay for its time, but it's 20 years old, now it's almost 30. So, they didn't, though. That's the funny thing about this story. That the manufacturers haven't at all said you're going to have to use these hearing aids with real ear measures so that people can really get the benefit out of them that they need.
Really wish they would turn off those automated features and actually program them like you're supposed to.
Yes, that would be nice. And we remain interested in this question of normal speech understanding because, back 6 years ago, I came close to it, but I didn't get a normal score, even after I programmed these premium hearing aids. Because, as Dr. Sharma showed us, a good quick speech and noise test score, a normal score, will be brain sparing. There's no more this shifting of the temporal lobe to the frontal and prefrontal areas. There's no more shifting of the visual area to the auditory area. Everything stays put. This is good news because, going back to our dementia story, probably overusing the frontal area for the wrong stuff is what's making the link between dementia and hearing loss. So, we did a database search of our 3,000 plus patients in our files to find out who scored normally on this test, because Ashley and I had been seeing a few who did. And I wanted to know how many. Well, right at the time we put this together, it was 17. It's currently 20, but that's not a very good record. But with this caveat, the quick speech and noise test hasn't been around forever, so a lot of these 3,000 people never took the quick speech and noise test, so it's not really as bad as it looks, but it's, I'd like that number to be higher even at that. So 20 people, 17 at the time of this test, scored normally on this test. Hooray. So I wanted to know why. I thought I did, but I wanted to know why. And I'll give you a little insight into why I thought I knew why. Remember looking at that graph where I did the quick speech and noise test and everybody did better when I programmed the hearing aids to their actual hearing loss, and the newer hearing aids were better than the old ones? I thought it was because everybody that was scoring normally would have the newest hearing aid, because it sort of looked like that from the previous 2012 study. Now, a lot of people say because you're over 65, you're not able to use your cognitive resources like you used to. They've declined somewhat. It's a very popular theory as to why you all have more trouble understanding speech and noise. So I thought, okay, then when I look at these 17 people, they're all going to be younger. Makes sense, right? But nope. They range from 30 to 82 years of age, with a mean age of 63.1, which is, by the way, about the same age as the Bentler, Palmer, and Dittenberner study. So we were sort of in the same category of subjects. But age didn't matter. These people ranged in age. So I thought, well, maybe, these people who have used their brains a lot to get advanced degrees, maybe they would have higher scores. I'm still sort of on that cognitive decline idea. So if you've been using your brain really rigorously, then perhaps education level would show up as being the variable, and these 17 people would all have advanced degrees. Nope. They varied from high school graduates to MDs and all points in between, master's degrees, MA, MS, you name it. There was no relationship to education level or age. Next. Maybe they had superior hearing aids. That one really made sense to me. This is where I thought the rubber would meet the road. But nope, that wasn't it at all. In fact, it's shocking. They had the most basic hearing aid that was ever developed in the world of digital hearing aids. One of them over there, the red one, is known as the Resound Pulse. It's the least expensive hearing aid we sell to people because it's virtually indestructible unless you get a hammer and hit it or run over it with your car or your dog eats it. Those are the three main things that usually cause failure of this hearing aid. But it has nothing on it. It has no volume control. It has no fancy features to manage noise. It's got nothing. It's a nice, pleasant little hearing aid, and you put the programmer in it, and you program it to the individual's hearing loss, and then all they have to do is open the battery door to turn it off at night, and close the battery door to turn it on in the morning, and put it in their ear. That's the whole thing of that hearing aid. It's about as straightforward and simple a hearing aid as ever built. And the thing I love about it is when we were talking the other day, I said, when was it last time you can remember, 2 years now, she's been at this clinic, that we sent in a pulse for repair?
Maybe one or two. Maybe.
Out of perhaps 100? Now, by contrast, do not ask that question about the one over on the far right, because we send those in for repair maybe
Every day.
Every day.
We at least have one or two repairs a day.
So, and boy, it can do everything. That thing will make breakfast for you. Squared, yes, Lynx Squared 7. It will, in fact, it's the one that Nikki's wearing right now. No, I take it back. She's got even a newer version of it.
There's another step up as a Lynx 3D, but that's what I was wearing before, was the Lynx Square.
When you get a phone call, it rings in both ears. You can talk through the hearing aids. You can stream sounds from your iPhone. You can shut off the background noise when you're in a noisy room trying to hear on the phone or listening to the television. If there's wind noise and it makes your hearing aids flutter, you can blow the wind away and make it stop. It's really the hearing aid that has it all. So I thought that was going to be the variable. This hearing aid, oh, and it also has a 90%, so says the manufacturer, a 90% plus accuracy rate at identifying where you are. It'll know, oh, this is a restaurant, so I have to do this. Oh, wait, no, this is a theater. I've got to do this. Oh, no, I'm in the car, so I've got to do this. It has environmental detection capabilities. So
It also has something called like geotagging, to where like maybe when you're at the Roadhouse or some type of restaurant that's really noisy, you can set your settings that how you like it and save it to that location. Now the next time you walk into that location, it'll automatically change over to that setting that you liked last visit.
impressive, yes? So that should be the reason you're scoring normally on the quick speech and noise test. Unfortunately, there it sat, the pulse, spoiling that whole view of why people are doing so great. And there were some intermediate technologies too. Well, then I thought perhaps it's brand specific. Maybe it's just one company that's got the corner on this market, because, you know, I showed you just 2 Resound hearing aids, so I thought, okay, it's Resound that knows how to do this. And they would tell you, yes, we are. But come to find out, no, they're not. It's not that at all. It's not brand. In fact, one subject had a 14-year-old hearing aid, and guess which one it was? It was the Siemens Triano from the previous study. The one that showed normal on that hearing and noise test that Bentler and Palmer and Dittenberner did back in 2004. It crops up again. Here it is. One of those patients had that 14-year-old hearing aid, and son of a gun, they scored normally. Yay. And like I said, same one. And then there was the other 12-year-old Resound Pulse yielded a normal score. So it can't be the new hearing aid features producing these scores. Can't be the manufacturer. Yeah, you know, if you look at the manufacturers, Oticon has brain hearing. You'd want that, wouldn't you? Phonak restores the sounds of life. Resound has surround sound. Savantos replicates nature, and Widex, I can't quite read what they do, but they provide all these amazing...
Life without limits, beyond hearing.
Yes, so you would reason that sounds pretty good. So maybe one brand was superior, but again, I say, no, it wasn't. There were several brands represented. So, not brand, not model, not your age. Now, some normal scores were obtained with very basic hearing aids, but Robin Cox would be sitting in the audience right now saying, I could have told you that years ago. We did a study, what was it, 2014, 15?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They look back up one if you would, or go forward now. They looked at 45 subjects. Their hearing loss shown on the average age 70 years, so they're a little older than ours. Their average hearing loss, just like ours, just like the one that Bentler and colleagues showed. Nothing new there. Each participant used 4 pairs of hearing aids. She just went with 2 manufacturers. She didn't do all 6 like I did. She just did 2. They got 2 pair of hearing aids from 2 manufacturers for a grand total of 4 pair. And she ordered the most basic hearing aid each manufacturer made and the most advanced hearing aid each manufacturer made, and didn't tell people which they were. Took all the markings off so nobody could figure out which was basic, which was premium, from 2 different manufacturers. And then she programmed them to the same exact loudness correction for the individual's hearing loss. So the basic hearing aids were programmed exactly like the deluxe hearing aids, which is what I did in our previous study, appropriate to the individual's hearing losses. And then she went to see, do they notice a difference between this premium and basic technology? Next slide. Oh, and she didn't tell them which was which. She then had them do a whole bunch of speech and noise tests. Now, at the University of Memphis, they like the CST, connected speech test, because they developed it, and they use several others, though. And I think the I wouldn't swear to it, but I think the quick speech and noise test was one of them also. But they gave them a bunch of speech and noise tests, and they did a couple of other things that were interesting. They had them fill out some formal questionnaires, but they also had them make a diary every day. Okay, I'm using hearing aid A, B, C, or D, hearing aid pair A, B, C, or D. And today, using that in this noisy place, I did like this. So they had a running tally of what people perceived in their everyday listening environments with these hearing aids, with the premium and basic from two different manufacturers, programmed all the same. And come to find out, same thing I found, they did not report better outcomes with the premium processing with any single measure. Not in their diaries, not in their speech and noise tests in the clinic, and not in their formal tests that asked them questions about how well they did. And come to find out, Liza and Colette and I, some years ago, showed that back in 2011. I did really well on the driver's training test with my eyesight. Back in 2011, we found the same thing. We looked at all 6, and we found no significant difference between premium and basic. As long as you program them the same, the programming seems to be the thing, not the model or the brand. And they weren't that different, just as an aside, between the brands. Maybe the hearing aid programming was superior then. Maybe we did a better job on these 17 people who scored normally.
No, virtually all of our patients have a program that matches their hearing loss as confirmed by real ear aided measures. What is real ear aided measures? It is a device that tells us exactly how the hearing aid is working inside your ear compared to your hearing loss. And how that works is we have a machine called the Axiom. There are many others out there. There's the Verifit, there's a MedRex real ear measurement, there's an RM500, which is an older model. And we put the microphone inside your ear. It's a probe tube that goes inside the ear. And then the hearing aid goes on over it. And a speaker, if you see that speaker that's pointing there, there's a sound that comes out of the speaker. And the hearing aid will hear the sound that's coming out of the speaker of the machine and send the signal to your ear. And the microphone inside your ear is reading what is being put into your ear. And then it shoots out a graph like this. This is what we see when we're programming your hearing aids. And this on the right ear, that is a right ear hearing loss. And you can see the other line, the squiggling line, that is the full correction line, the little dots. We want to try and have the squiggly lines match that dotted line. And you can see there that the hearing aid is meeting that target and giving a full correction for that user. Same thing on the left ear. There's the hearing loss on the left ear, and there's the full correction line. So both ears are giving a full correction for this user for all the speech sounds that they need to hear. Specifically, our cumulative average error for all 17 patients in the study was an average of 4 decibels across all frequencies important for speech understanding. Here's our proof. You can see this. If they had a perfect score, it would be at the 0 line right up here. And here, the red and the blue line, that's actually what the hearing aids were doing for them. And we had a total error rate of 4.09. So it wasn't completely perfect. Why was there any error? Well, we had some thoughts on that, and a lot of people, there are some people that cannot tolerate a full correction. Sometimes they don't like the high frequencies, so they don't like it sounding tinny. And so we have to drop out the high frequencies a little bit more. So some patients just cannot achieve a full correction, and some of these people that we did in the study were new users, so they could not tolerate a full correction yet.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that too. I also looked to see, was it length of time you'd worn the hearing aid? There's an idea that auditory adaptation takes place. You learn to hear with the hearing aid again. Oh no, there were beginners and there were people who had been wearing hearing aids for 20 years. It had nothing to do with whether you were brand new hearing aid wearer or long time wearer. That was not the variable that determined these scores. I should have put that in.
And as a new user, we don't want to put all those sounds back in the very first day because it can be very overwhelming. You're going to hear things like when you're walking through gravel, you're going to hear the gravel louder than you've heard in a long time. You put on your rain jacket, you're going to hear that swishing of the rain jacket. So we don't want to give you all of that right away. We start you out at a half correction, and it depends on the patient. They can go anywhere from, it can take anywhere from 2 weeks to achieve to a full correction to 3 months, sometimes even longer. How does it compare to the programming errors that we've found elsewhere? Well, wow, Ron, that is really small.
What they discovered, this study here, was that the error in 70% of the fittings was in the magnitude of 10 decibels, so much more than our 4. And that was one study, but it gets worse because we looked at it in another way.
And this was 11.4% error rate, or no, 11.4 dB error rate on this other study. We did a study with 176 hearing aids programmed in 24 facilities throughout Oregon, and they had an 11.4. So at least we're better than that. 11.4 versus 4 decibels. So was the hearing aid programming better for these 17 patients than others with the same hearing loss? No, all of our patients receive real ear verified programming, and we strive to bring everyone to a full correction so they have the best speech understanding possible. And that brings you back to Ron.
So the next question, I thought perhaps they have less distortion in the auditory system. And where that would show up is in a test that we do early on in the hearing test, where we ask you to repeat words in dead quiet. We just want to see what's the best you can do under optimum conditions. So we amplify the sounds to your preferred listening level, and then we have you repeat words. So I thought, logically, then probably these people all were scoring 100% under optimum listening conditions, because that would explain why they're able to do so well on this test in noise with their hearing aids. Because once they get enough loudness, they have the potential to have very clear speech. That one made sense to me too, but that wasn't it. They ranged in scores from 70 to 100% under even optimum dead quiet conditions. So I was really surprised when those people who are scoring 70% in dead quiet, amplified to their preferred listening levels under earphones, were scoring normally with their hearing aids. They were doing better than they could with our high fidelity hearing testing system with their hearing aids. Hooray, but surprising. So, the next question, what in the world was different about these 17 people? What was unique about them? Well, several things. None of them had a severe hearing loss. When you get to the point way down there, this is their average hearing loss, by the way, with the red being the right ear, the blue being the left. And again, you can see it's much like the patients from the previous 2 studies. But none of them were down there at the bottom of the page. They were all had residual usable hearing at every pitch important for understanding speech. So that was the first thing. Now, there's not a lot you can do about that. Granted, I mean, you got the hearing loss you got, but there are some things you might think about relative to that generalization, and we'll get to that. Next slide. None of them had what was called a cochlear dead region. Some of, particularly you veterans, some of you, when I'm doing a hearing test on you, you have pretty good hearing in the low pitches. That's why the red and the blue marks are pretty close to zero. But then they trail way down in the high pitches. Why? Because extreme noise exposure damages the high pitches to a greater extent in the early phases. Sometimes so much that there are no nerve cells for hearing remaining in those areas. And you all say something very typical when you have a cochlear dead region. When we get to those high-pitched sounds, you don't hear a little high squeaky beep. You hear something like the wind blowing, and they often say to us, it sounds like the wind. That's a sign of a cochlear dead region. And what's happening actually is we're pressing so hard on those nerve cells, those missing nerve cells where they should be in the high pitches, that it's spreading the energy across the partition where the nerve cells live and stimulating the low pitch sounds. So all of a sudden you're hearing all of them firing at once and it sounds like the wind blowing. So I hear wind blowing means cochlear dead region. And none of these people had a cochlear dead region, because when you do, there's nothing I can do to get your hearing back with hearing aids. But I do predict there will come a time, probably within the next 5-6 years, I hope, where people with this hearing loss will get cochlear implants for those high pitches. The surgery for cochlear implants that replaces the nerve cells with wires has become so good that oftentimes people are able to maintain their residual hearing. I'm seeing more and more people who've had cochlear implant surgery who've maintained their residual hearing. And in fact, there's one hybrid hearing aid, hybrid cochlear implant hearing aid system that looks to do exactly like that. It's experimental, not currently used widely, but it's only designed to put those high pitches back into your range of audibility so you have the potential to score normally on those speech and noise tests. But none of our patients had that. So there's something you can do about that, of course. You know, cochlear dead regions are preventable. I was an underground miner back in 1974, and underground mining is extremely noisy, especially the hard rock stuff I was doing with copper mining, because you use these big drills to drill through granite, and they're very noisy, so much that if you eat a lot, it'll upset your stomach from the pressure waves against your stomach. So just be sure to wear hearing protection, because this is not my hearing loss up there in the top left corner, because I wore effective hearing protection all the time I was there. So don't get a cochlear dead region in the first place if you can avoid it, and most of them can be avoided. 15 of the 17 people had what's called a large dynamic range. That means they were very tolerant of amplified sounds. I could turn them up quite a bit. People who have almost no difference between the softest sound they can hear and the loudest sound they will tolerate are very difficult hearing aid fittings, and they tend not to do as well on any kind of speech test, because you're having to cram everything into such a narrow range that it distorts the speech somewhat to protect their ears from loud sounds. So these people did not have a small dynamic range by and large. Now, if you look, you can see the studies are fairly similar. They're the same kind of hearing losses. Next. So what can we say about these 17 subjects that scored normally on this difficult speech and noise test? First, age is irrelevant. Remember, they were 27 to 80. Hearing aid brand and model, irrelevant. Manufacturers don't like us to say that. The hearing aid age doesn't matter. They could be 14, they could be 2 days old. Next. So what's to be learned from all of this, David?
Well, I've been given the task of summarizing a little bit. What can we learn? You need a hearing aid that is feedback resistant and that can be programmed to a full correction for your hearing loss. You need real ear measures to guide the hearing aid programming. And that's critical. You should start using hearing aids before you become really hard of hearing.
Let me just say something about that. That's not the national trend. The national trend is a 10-year delay between I seem to have a problem and I'm going to do something about it. So if you want to wait that long until you're really impaired, your chances of scoring normally on this test are poor.
And I have to agree with that. I've probably not seen as many people with hearing loss as Ron has, but I have seen many, many, many over the years. And basically people put it off as long as they possibly can until they're right up against the wall, they can't hear, and then they finally do something about it. And obviously from Ron is saying that this is not the best strategy. Go ahead.
It also it takes you longer to get used to hearing aids when you wait too long. I noticed the patients that waited longer than they should have, it takes about a year or two before I can even get them up to a full correction because they've just gone way too long.
I'll say this too. I find that as cognitive ability slips, people become progressively less tolerant of amplification. The further you let yourself go into that place where you're using the frontal area all the time to do any communication whatsoever, puts you in a place where you really are not very tolerant of trying to go back and use your auditory area again. My cardiologist always says, the body is a habitual thing. I have atrial fibrillation. You lose your normal rhythm from time to time. And he said, don't just sit at home when you get that. Get down there and get electrocuted and get back in rhythm. Because if you let the body get used to it, you know, he said, if I send you over to a rate expert after 2 years of atrial fibrillation, he'll just laugh at you. But if you continue cardioverting every time, your heart gets used to being in rhythm, not out of rhythm. I believe the same thing to be true about the brain. If you let your brain get so ensconced in prefrontal area hearing, essentially, speech understanding, your brain is going to be very unwilling to make that shift backwards. So from a physiological standpoint, I think you should be starting now rather than later.
And all it takes is 3 months to have your brain do all that shifting.
Going on.
Shifting back, yes. She does think 3 months to shift back.
Okay, moving on though, you don't need to buy the most expensive hearing aids unless you're going to use those advanced features. And there are some people who do use them, and there are a lot of people, I would say the majority of people, who actually don't use all of those advanced features. So you can, not necessarily go with state of the art, although
I oftentimes try to encourage people to start with a resound pulse because we know they work pretty well and they don't cost as much by a long shot and they don't break down. Those are the things I love.
And I've tried all of the hearing aids, basic to premium. The Pulse, I can't. It doesn't have enough volume for me. I'm very severely hard of hearing. But the other basic, intermediate, and premium level hearing aid, I do just as well with the hearing aid by themselves without, the phone and all the other features that it comes with. So you're going to hear just the same between all the different models.
good point. Another point, you should avoid high levels of unprotected noise exposure so you don't end up with a cochlear dead region. And Ron already talked about what happens if you have that cochlear dead region. So we also noticed that level of education doesn't matter.
So don't everybody run out and get a doctorate now.
The other way of looking at that is that if you do not have higher degrees, it's not going to hurt you at all. And this study shows that it does not hurt you at all. While not obvious from this data, I am guessing you also need to be a good guesser.
Yeah, that's they say that personal opinion is the lowest form of scientific evidence, and here, this is my slide here. But I really do think there is something to that. We see people who will say, hey, the sentence will be, give me an example.
Found the cheese.
Yeah, the field mouse found the cheese, and they miss the word cheese. Well, you heard the E. The field mouse heard the E. The field mouse found the E. Guess. Cheese. There was some more even obvious ones than that, though. I'm trying to think. And we'll sit there sometimes while we're giving this quick speech and noise test, and people will say the most amazing, they'll get every word except for one, and their guess is like, oh, I wished okay. My memory.
No.
One of the sentences is a cruise in warm waters in a sleek yacht is fun. And some people will get a cruise wrong, but they'll get warm waters in a yacht. And they heard the k or the ruse part of that word, and they'll say something completely tomato. They'll say something absolutely weird, and you can tell that they're just not good guessers, and they score fairly horribly on those tests.
Because I don't think that all these people heard every single word. I think they were filling in occasionally. And that skill is critical to being a champion with hearing aids, because nobody hears every word. I fill in myself. I got normal hearing, but still, I sort of, in fact, I'll do it to her sometimes. I'll say, okay, you said blah, 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 and I missed this word. Was it? I try to integrate from what it must have been based on the fact I didn't hear it. Sometimes my guesses aren't very good either. But fortunately, I'm not having to score normally on the quick speech and noise test with hearing aids. But I do think there is some good guessing. People who can assimilate quickly. Nikki is an excellent quick figure-outer.